All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And thanks for joining us today for the second session in this Farmers Market series. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the business side of agriculture and particularly for farmers markets. And we're going to talk about pricing today. So a couple of the items we're going to talk about factors to consider when pricing your products, and particularly those 4 C's. We'll talk a little bit about strategies to price, as well as pricing resources. And then we'll leave some time for questions. As far as the resources are mentioned throughout the session, we will be sending out the link to the recording if you want to review it, if you're a glutton for punishment. And so we'll add some of the resources to that link. And I think overall, we're also setting up an individual site where we will house all of those recordings and resources for you later on. So let us start with a poll question. So let me make sure you can see that. So the first question is, which is the most important to a successful small agribusiness? And then what is the best way to price your products? So we'll just give about a minute. So you have about 25 seconds left. Okay, we'll just wait for a couple more people to answer. We're at 73% of people answering. Okay, so I'll end the poll there, and we'll take up some of maybe, you guys will, maybe not everybody was able to participate. So 53% of people said the most important of these factors to successful small business is basically all of the above. And the best way to price your products is basically all of the above too. So knowing what your customers are willing to pay, what your competitors are charging, as well as your, cost of production. And as far as the important factors, a couple of people said making sure you're pricing it accurately, which is what we'll talk about today, making sure you're working with others, especially for small businesses. But most people said all of the above. And so I think the majority has it here for both of the questions. The answers were actually all of the above. So, in terms of pricing, we will look at pricing today, but we will talk about the fact that pricing is just one element in everything else that you do. So, pricing, I'm just making sure that you guys are not seeing some of the other things I have on my screen, right? Like my control bar and so on. You guys are not seeing that, right?
I'm not seeing it. I think okay, you're fine. Perfect.
Do you need to close the poll results?
Oh, so I thought I did. Did I?
I think I got it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm trying to make this smaller. Okay, yes, so coming back to, oops. There we go. Is it closed now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Apologize for that. So again, price is just one item or one issue in what we call that whole marketing mix. So basically, what you do, what you produce, and how you communicate what you're doing, and where you're selling, and who you're selling to, and how you position your product. We'll talk about that. And then, your whole process for planning and managing risks is what we call that big picture in farming, right? And so price is just one of the important aspects. But of course, we're going to talk about price here, but I'll relate price to some of these other items to show you how it's all interrelated. And so price is also very important because price impacts your profitability, right? If we think about your revenue is basically priced by the quantity you're selling. But then a very important consideration also in terms of impacting profits would be your production cost. So while price is important, you also want to be able to manage, how much you're selling, and then to control your production cost. And one thing I always try to remind producers is that we're in business, you really want to be able to maximize your profits rather than maximizing your revenue. So if you think about it this way, would you rather make $10,000 in revenue and spend $9,000 in expenses to keep $1,000 in profits? Or would you rather make $5,000 in revenue, spend $4,000 in expenses to keep $1,000 in revenue? $1,000 in profits. You're keeping the same amount of profits, but in the latter case with the $5,000 revenue, you're only putting forward that $4,000 in expenses, right? So you're better off maximizing profits at a $5,000 revenue level than at a $10,000 revenue level. So you want to remember, you want to maximize profits, not maximize revenue, okay? And then I want you to think about this in the background as I explain about prices today. And so this information came from a Northeast farmers market study in 2018. And so obviously it's pre-COVID. And so that survey showed that in 2018, farmers markets across the Northeast were actually down 20 to 70% in terms of consumers as well as sales, okay? So overall, they were seeing declines in people attending and in the sales of those farmers markets. And they attributed that to four top reasons. There were other reasons, but the four were that they were basically an overproliferation of too many markets that were kind of competing and cannibalizing each other, or that there were other options for purchasing local foods at your grocery store, at these meal kits that are mailed to your house, inadequate advertising and promotion for these markets. And then they felt that the markets were sort of out of touch with what consumer needed and what they desired. And so again, this is over the Northeast, so your farmers market might be very different, right? But overall, remember, even if this is not necessarily true for your market, remember the consumer's perception is what is important, because perception is reality unless it is proven otherwise, okay? So did I do that annotation? I don't think I did. So Emily or Jody, if you can, somebody can remove that annotation, that would be great, that red line there. Is that me?
There, I got it.
Oh, there we go. All right. The other important thing as we talk about pricing, coming from that same study, they looked at, what were the barriers to shopping at farmers markets? And they looked at people who were very regular shoppers. They call those the flag bearers. They talked about casual shoppers, people who would stop in frequently, and then, people who would come once in a while. And overall, one of the top four barriers was that price was not competitive with other options. So again, you might think, oh, this is, that's not true. We have really good prices at farmers markets. That's true, but unless you help your consumers to understand that, then their perception is basically reality. So today we'll talk a little bit about 10 lessons in pricing your products. So we'll talk some core pricing, and then we'll talk about how pricing affects some of the other things we do. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about as we talk about pricing is to think about what you want to get out of your enterprise and selling at the farmers market. So looking at beginning with the end in mind. And if your end goal is to, let's say, make $10,000 in sales from tomatoes, let's say tomatoes is the only thing you're growing, and you're going to be at this farmers market for 12 weeks, then basically that means you want to make about $830 from tomato sales every week. And if you're going to sell that at $3, that means every week you want to sell an average of about 280 pounds. And if you think about if you're growing this in a high tunnel, you have 300 plants, getting an average of 15 pounds per plant over that 12 weeks. You want to be harvesting about 375 pounds per week. And if you think about what is my post-harvest loss, so what can I actually sell, you're basically going to be selling about 280 pounds per week, right? So you're kind of reverse engineering your goal to figure out, what kind of production do I need to meet my targeted sales? And then you will think about, okay, well, what if I can't sell it at $3? What if I have to lower my price? How will that affect the amount I need to sell? And so on. What if my production losses were higher? How do I need to adjust my prices or my production volume, right? So those are some of the kinds of things that feed into what prices you're going to charge at the farmers market. The second thing, as we think about prices, is producing for a market rather than just trying to sell what you produce, when it's ready for harvesting or ready for sale, okay? And so one of the things that you have to do is you have to understand, you have to kind of do a little bit of what we call market research, which is just finding out a little bit about your customer. Remember, in order for you to be successful, you have to have a sufficient quantity of products, right? So you have to have a volume that your consumers will buy, but you also have to have a sufficient number of customers wanting that product, okay? So producing what that consumer wants will increase the chances that people are going to buy from you so that you will have sufficient customers. And then the other angle would be, as I said in that first lesson, is then you have sufficient volume to be able to sell to them, right? And then understanding that consumers, so you have to ask, who are they, where are they, what do they want, how much are they willing to pay, are there other competitors or other farmers providing the same thing, and then so how can you differentiate your product? So what are some of those other things, some of those other values that they might be willing to pay a little more for? So now with all COVID and post-COVID and so on, things like delivery options, things like packaging, things like, basically just a pickup option and so on. And then you want to think about what's missing from the market. What do customers want that they aren't really getting, right? And so remember, as we think about our customers, if there's not a customers, then you obviously, you don't grow it, right? So because you're not going to be profitable, okay? Then the third thing is you want to make sure that you're satisfying that customer, but you're also making a profit. So you really want to be what we call market oriented. You want to make sure that you are producing for that market. And by that, I mean that you're producing a product that your customers want and they're willing to pay for, and they're willing to pay the price that will cover your cost of production as well as help you make a profit. So one of the key things we talk about when we talk about pricing is to figure out what is your break-even point, meaning figure out what does it cost me to produce a unit of whatever I'm producing. It could be kombucha, it could be maple syrup, it could be sweet corn, green beans, right? What does it cost you to produce a unit of what you are intending on selling, so that you know what we would refer to as your price floor, that you know what that price is. And the way to be able to do that is to use an enterprise budget. Now, we have some enterprise budgets that would allow you to evaluate a single enterprise, as I said, green beans, sweet corn, maple syrup, or you can use enterprise budgets that will cover multiple crops. We don't have time to delve very deeply into enterprise budgets today, but as I said, those are some resources that we will make available to you. How do you, an enterprise budget for a single enterprise, horticulture, meat, a value-added enterprise, and so on. So we'll have those resources available. What do I mean by an enterprise budget? It's basically simply, a plan for what you're going to grow, how much you think that can produce, how much you can possibly sell it for. That's going to give you sort of an estimated revenue. And here I'm taking a very, very simplified enterprise budget for one bed of specialty green beans. And then that enterprise budget is going to kind of lay out all of the costs associated with growing this bed of green beans, so that we have our total cost, so that you can figure out what your estimated profit or net returns would be. But more than that, what we're going to use that enterprise budget for, is to figure out what our break-even price is. And your break-even price, remember, that's the price you're going to, that you have to have in order to cover your total cost. So it's simply your total cost, which we get from here, divided by the quantity you're going to produce. So in this case, for this bed of green beans, when I consider all of my cost, I need to have $1.83 per pound for my green beans to just cover my cost of production. If you know nothing else about your enterprise, I would say that the cost of production is probably the most important number you need in order to price your product, because this is my break even. When I sell at $1.83, I am just covering my costs, but I'm not making any profits. And so that I would want to add profits onto that. And then the other thing with that enterprise budget is it allows you, I know this looks a little complicated, we're going to provide you with these resources so you can see how it works. But let's say, for example, I was growing tomatoes in a high tunnel, just like my enterprise budget for that green beans, I have the yield. So I have about 14 pounds per plant for a total of 44.80 in my whole high tunnel. And then I lay out my variable and my fixed cost. So I get a break even under here of 53 cents. But the way I lay this out is it allows you to ask some of those questions like, what if I had much less production than I thought? Or what if I had more? What if my cost changed? How does my break even change? So it allows you to do this sort of sensitivity analysis, and it looks at how your break even, the bottom line here, would change accordingly as factors of production changes, so that you are, ready to sort of pivot and change those prices depending on what your situation is. So during COVID, when people had to add things, they had to add other employees because they had to package this and they had to wait out front to be able to just put it in your car, or maybe they transitioned to online, so they had that additional cost. And so you're able to add those costs on here to sort of come up with what you need to break even for those different types of products. And then the other thing about those enterprise budgets, it's allowing you to look at, how break even changes. And sometimes we have producers that really don't include your labor when you are thinking about your prices. And another mistake that we commonly make is that we assume that we can sell 100% of what we produce, right? And so some people have a lot higher post-harvest losses, whether that is, it didn't sell, or when you take it to market, it got damaged, or, you have dropped produce and those kinds of things. So there's another way for you to figure out, and here I just have this illustration to just make you aware. So if you are excluding labor and you are assuming you're selling 100% of what you produce, you might think, I'm just using this tomato example, that your break even is closer to 59 cents, let's say 60 cents, right? But when you add labor in there, and when you think, what is my average post-harvest loss? Maybe it's 50%. So let's use that. That's probably a worst case scenario. Your break even should be closer to $1.72, right? So almost 3 times what you thought it was. So again, I often say, when you've seen one farm in West Virginia, you've seen one farm in West Virginia, right? Because we're all so different. So these are just ways that you can use these resources to make sure that you're taking into consideration all of your factors in terms of pricing your product. So you want to make sure you're looking at that cost of production, but you're adjusting it based on all of these sort of differences. So some farmer might have, closer to 80, 75%, sales in terms of what they're actually selling. Some people might have, only be able to sell 50% of what they're producing, right? So those are some things you want to take into consideration. And as I say, that enterprise budget could be for anything. So we had green beans, we had tomatoes. You can also do it for your value-added products. Again, here's a very simple illustration. If I were making strawberry jam, for example, I had my fixed cost, so that I'm just doing, my annual fixed cost. And that could be, part of that startup cost, some insurance, some advertising, maybe some marketing, like, what are my farmers market fees and so on. And then I will want to know what my variable cost for a jar of strawberry jam would be. So you have some other variable costs. So let's say that's $2 and my annual fixed cost is about $10,000. So now I want to know, well, how much should I, what's my break even for this jar of strawberry, 10 ounce, 12 ounces, whatever. So you basically, the equation would be a variable cost divided by, so the variable cost per unit, which is this $2, and then you added to your annual cost, which is 10,000 divided by what's your projected sales. So if I'm only selling 5,000 units, right, I have to cover this $10,000 fixed cost, plus $2 in variable cost for every unit I produce. So my break even at this production level would be $4. If I were to produce more, obviously my break even is going to go down, right? So again, it depends on, what volume of production, but also on your production cost, okay? And you can do this, you can do this for anything. You can adapt these enterprise budgets for anything. Whether it's agritourism, whether it's any other value-added product, and so on. Okay, so again, we'll provide those resources as we send the link to the recording. I'm not going to talk meat here because meat is often one of those beasts where it's much better to sort of go through those enterprise budgets and sort of talk to us on a one-on-one basis in terms of how are you pricing your meats. Okay. The other thing that we find that farmers are regularly overlook is what does it cost me to go to market? So yes, I consider that break-even cost of production, right? Because we're all production oriented. We want to make sure that we're covering that cost of production. But then there's all of these costs associated with getting that product to where the customers actually are at the farmer's market. Right. And so here we're looking at, and occasionally you have to think about, so your farmer's market might be your primary market, but then you might have other secondary markets where you sell your surplus items. It might be a farm to school, it might be a local restaurant, and so on. Right. So then the other thing you want to look at is, well, what is it costing me to sell my products at these different venues? And so for your farmer's market, if we're assuming, that it's 20 weeks and you're going there twice a week, there's going to be transportation costs, there's going to be labor, there's going to be supplies. So let's say going to the farmer's market for the entire season or 20 weeks would be about $6,000. And I'm selling tomatoes, right? So I'm selling tomatoes plus a bunch of other things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give tomatoes 20% of this total value here. So I'm going to ascribe 20% of my cost, that transportation cost or transaction or marketing cost, however you want to call it. I'm going to give the tomatoes $1,200. So I'm going to say to get my tomatoes, all 760 pounds, I'm just assuming that that's what I'm going to sell for the entire period. I'm going to give that $1,200 in that marketing cost. So that means for every pound of tomato I sell, I need to charge an additional $1.58 or to cover my cost of transportation. So if my original break-even price was, let's say, 50 cents per pound, I then need to add $1.58. So now I'm at $2.08 break even at that farmer's market. See? So it's not just the cost of production in your field or in your greenhouse, but it's also what is it costing me to get to the market. Similarly, I can do it for if I'm taking it to a school, for example, and I do the same thing. It's going to take me $1,800 to get it to the school or to the restaurant for that entire week period, the 20 weeks, when I'll have those tomatoes available. So if I'm selling 800 pounds, that means I need to add 45 cents to my break-even price to cover my total cost, including production cost as well as getting it to the market. Okay, so don't forget that cost of taking your products to the market. That's an important part of pricing your products. Okay, and then one of the other things that you have to remember is understanding which products will help you meet your profit target. Because each product, so let's say, for example, I was making some of these products from my goat's milk, for example. I'm making some hand cream, I'm making some sort of spray, I'm making some lip balm, and so on, right? I'm making a whole lot of different products. So here I have hypothetical products. It could be just different products in your product line. It could be different vegetables, for example, okay? And let's say this other column represents what my returns or my profits are. So after I've paid off my cost, these are the profits left over. So this is what I will pocket from each of these products, right? So in your mind, you give these products some names. This is my profit. So if I say, well, which product would you prefer to produce? You're going to say, well, maybe these top 4 because those have the highest profits after I've paid off my cost of production, right? But then the other thing, because so the two resources that are most limited to us obviously are our finances as well as our time. So if we take time and we say, okay, so for this profit, what is the hours of labor I had to put in here to get these? And assuming I didn't cover my labor when I looked at this, these returns, this profit, right? How much hours of labor? So, you know, if you're doing wild blueberry jelly or wild blueberry jam or something like that, where the hours of labor in getting those, you know, harvesting those wild blueberries is really very, very labor intensive. You want to look at, you know, what is your profits per labor hour? Okay, so if I think about, okay, for this product, so let's say this is wild blueberry jam, I'm going to put in a lot of hours of labor just in harvesting, right? So I'm going to get, even though I get a lot of profits, I'm going to get very little returns per labor compared to, you know, if I just did product 6, which might be, I don't know, strawberry jam, for example, I might have 2 hours of labor, 2.8 hours of labor, but I will be getting more profits per labor hour. So maybe I might want to do, you know, 5 times as much product 6 as I want to do product 1, and then I will end up with more profits considering my whole labor. Okay, so again, remember my very first example of do I want to make 10,000 and only keep 1,000, or do I want to make 5,000 and still keep 1,000? It's kind of that same thing. You want to work smarter, not harder. So you really want to look at, you know, what does it mean in terms of these products? How much labor am I putting in to be able to get the profits? Okay. And the 5th lesson would be making sure you know what that dignity price is. And for farmers, oftentimes we think that if somebody complains about our prices, we need to apologize, we need to lower it. But when I talk about your dignity price, I'm talking about making sure that you know where that price floor is. Covering that is basically your dignity price. You want to make sure that you are very, very clear on what that break even is and what is the price you will absolutely not go under. If you are, so if you go under the floor, you're basically in the basement, right? You don't want to be in the basement as far as pricing your products. You want to make sure you are above the price floor. So this is where the 3 C's are going to come in. So first of all, you need to figure out what is your cost of production per unit. So that's your price floor or your break-even price. And then, so obviously the opposite of your price floor is your price ceiling, right? So what is the highest price you can charge? And this is where knowing your customers and knowing their willingness to pay is going to come in. So you have to know who your customers are. You know, are they looking for an affordable product, or are they looking for some sort of a specialty product, or are they looking for a good product, but they also want to support farmers and farmers' livelihood and so on? You need to be able to figure out who your customers are and what they're willing to pay, right? And do you think that they are going to, let's say you set your price ceiling at $5, or should you set your price ceiling at $3.50? Knowing who your customers are and what their, you know, willingness to pay is going to help you there. And how high your price ceiling is going to be depends on, you know, what are the other competitors and what they're charging. So I know sometimes when we are trying to price our products, the easiest thing for us to do would be to look at what our competitors are charging and try to match them or maybe beat them slightly or something like that. And so the best way to basically price your product is figuring out what is your cost of production, who are you selling to, and then sort of differentiate your product from your competitors. Remember when we talk farmers market situations, your fellow vendors are not necessarily your competitors, because it's the combined effect of all of these vendors that really draws people to the farmers market, right? So even though somebody else is selling tomatoes, maybe you can differentiate yourself by selling some other type, maybe heirloom tomatoes, right? Maybe you might have a way of differentiating it. Maybe you might be packaging it somewhat, and so on, okay? So you have to think about, how can I differentiate my products? I'll talk about that here in a minute. So in terms of knowing your customer and trying to figure out, what are they willing to pay, or how you should differentiate your product based on your customers, you want to basically develop some sort of a competitive advantage. And that means, how are you going to stand out from the crowd? So if you're this cow, how do you stand out from the rest of the herd, right? So it's important here to understand that when we talk about food, food is a different product than, let's say, anything else, cars and houses and that kind of thing, furniture, right? Food is something that's an emotional product for a lot of customers, right? And more so if they're what we call these foodies, right? Food, people have a very close interaction with it. And so we know that more and more people want to know where their food is coming from. We all hear the stories about, crazy things with our foods, unfair practices, unsanitary practices, and so on. So we have a lot of customers that are really waking up with respect to understanding where their food is coming from. And customers are more likely to purchase from you if they feel that there is that trust, right? They look at you, they feel that you are trustworthy, that you produce your food with a certain amount of care and safety and all of those other considerations. And so that's important for us to understand, right? So a lot of farmers markets take the time and the effort to make sure that they're promoting their farmers and helping customers understand who these farmers are and what they do and why they do what they do, right? And it's all in that effort to sort of get to know that customer, and of course, get to understand what their needs and preferences are. So what do they want? What are they willing to pay for? And that is going to help you to develop your competitive advantage. And once you develop your competitive advantage, you are kind of setting that price ceiling, right? So we talk about competitive advantage as your market position. And in marketing, when we say market position, it means, how do I want customers to view my product? Do I want them to think my product is an affordable product, or do I want them to think it's some sort of a specialty product, right? Because then your price ceiling is going to be different. For an affordable product, you're going to compete on price. So you want to be able to lower your price. But in order to do that, you have to have a lower cost of production, right? If your cost of production is higher, and if you have a specialty product, then you want to make sure that everything else you do, how you promote it, how you advertise this and so on, how you talk to your customers about your product, sort of projects that specialty product image, right? Some other ways you can differentiate or position your product, it could be fresh, local, high quality, and then you have to say what high quality means, right? It could be safe, you are working according to a food safety plan and so on, or the fact that you've been doing this kombucha or this maple syrup for, it's a tradition in your family, or the fact that this is a family farm and you're basically carrying on what the 7 generations did before you and so on. Sometimes we really have to, and I'll talk about this a little later on too, but sometimes you really have to talk about in terms of, like, let's say quality, for example. If you look at these products, at the farmer's market, there is no frame of reference. There's nothing to compare it to. So you have to help compare your products to, let's say, what they can get at the supermarket and so on, right? So if we're talking about longer shelf life, because your product hasn't traveled many food miles and so on, if we take microgreens, for example, if you get it at the store, it's already a few days old, and so it may last you, 2 to 5 days. If you're buying this fresh off the farm from a farmer, you have a twice as long shelf life, maybe even longer. So you have to take the time to explain that to the customer, either individually or through your website or your social media, and so that they can understand the cost savings and why your product might be priced a little higher, right? Choose the pricing strategy that works for you, again, depending on your product, depending on your cost of production, and so on. So as I kind of talked about this before, so undercutting your competition is not going to be a viable strategy, and it's not going to be in the best interest of the entire farmers market. It may help the customer, they're going to pay a lower price, but it's not going to help the vendors. So as I said, you want to be able to differentiate, you want to be able to price based on your cost of production, and then make sure that everything else you're doing, how you're promoting and so on, basically speaks to that cost of production, okay? And there's several ways to add value. We see it all the time at the farmers market. Think about, how can I separate myself and my products from other products in that space to be able to attract customers. And then again, these are the pricing strategies. A lot of people are familiar with these. Sometimes you might price for value. So you give them a better price if they're buying more quantity, or you encourage them with some sort of a discount when products are in season. Sometimes you even take a loss on your products, right? Because you want to draw people to your booth. And so eggs might be your loss leader, but when they come, they buy all the other products that you might have. Or sometimes you have premium prices, and then you might, your blemish products, you might reduce those prices. But of course, you want to help them understand, what can they do with those products, okay? Communication. You have to help your consumers know or understand the value in your product. So you want to grow what the market values, but again, you want to take the time to help customers see the value in your product. Going back to that survey that was done in 2018 in the Northeast, there was this misconception or this general feeling among customers that farmers markets are elitist. They're for these foodies. They generally have higher prices and so on. And sometimes they feel like, I go to the farmer's market, I just want red tomatoes, but I see all these fancy heirloom tomatoes and potatoes and so on. And I'm not sure, I feel dumb asking, like, how do you fix this and so on. So you have to make sure that when customers come, you take the time, either near the farmer's market or otherwise, through your signage, through your social media, through your website, to really help them understand what you're doing, why you're doing, and what products you have available, how they can use them, and so on. A good way to help customers see the value is to explain what are some of those things you're doing behind the scenes, because they don't see that when they just look at your product. Help them understand the expanded practices you're taking to make sure your products are safe. And in this era of COVID, some of those kinds of things, right? So you have to take the time to communicate with your customers. So communicating, again, using your social media websites to kind of inform or remind or persuade or inspire or connect people, right? One thing I always like to remind farmers about is this leaky bucket. And the purpose of showing you this leaky bucket is that sometimes in this bucket is all our customers, right? And the point is that it's much easier to keep customers than it is to attract new customers. So you want to make sure your bucket for your customers, where you're placing all your customers, is not really leaky. There are not many holes. So you want to build and maintain a relationship with your customers. That means connecting with them, trying to find ways that you can connect with them in between visits to the farmers market, right? So some people might have a farm tour, say, come out and look at what we do and how we do it and so on. Some people might send you regular emails or say, hey, why don't you like my page on Facebook, and you can communicate and sort of keep them that way. So you want to basically avoid the leaky bucket, okay? And then when it comes to pricing, again, you want to know where the market is headed. What are the average costs? Overall, we find that products right now post-COVID, well, not post-COVID, but you know what I mean, after COVID, the big issue that 2020 was, we have changes in prices. So you have to know where the market is headed, right? There are a lot of different market reports out there, some even closer to home, that you can track to see what people are willing to pay and what prices farmers are actually charging. We don't necessarily have a lot of this in West Virginia, so WVU Extension Service, a bunch of us here on the call in collaboration with the Farmers Market Association and so on, are trying to correct that by having a project that's meant to collect prices in different markets in different regions for different crops and so on. That's going to allow you, right, to basically benchmark or compare what you're doing to other people, or to look at, understand the competition in farmers markets by looking at price ranges, or other things like, what's the market window for their crops, or looking at, is season extended technologies worthwhile, and what are the differences in cost if something is produced, in a high tunnel, so it's early or late to market. Does that make it feasible for me to invest because of differences in prices, and a whole lot of other things. So we hope that once you see that, you would understand the benefit in it and you would participate in that price reporting project. And then the last lesson I have for you is basically advocating for your products and for the entire local food system. And when I say advocating, I want to make sure that you understand that, don't apologize for your prices, right? If your products are higher, and then you want to make sure that you communicate why that is so. That survey, again, I'm going back to that 2018 survey, found that for the most parts, prices at farmers market were much lower, at least 20% on average lower than other sources, whether it's your supermarkets and so on, okay? But the misconception, the way customers viewed it, is that prices at farmers market were generally higher. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're clearing up these misconceptions. So doing things like, a comparison shopping, you might want to do this right. So this is taken from an actual farmer's market where they're comparing their prices as to what you can get at the local supermarket. You can do that at the farmer's market. You can basically do it on your social media site, your website, and so on, just so that you're helping to educate that customer. Okay. And, you can do some dare to compare, like what are these prices? Create that comparison shopping, as I said, on your website, on your social media. in terms of communicating again and making sure your customers understand it, so in terms of that messaging, right? So how do you advocate and what kinds of messages are customers most receptive to? It seems from that survey that when we use that buy local, customers have heard it so much that they're generally unmotivated by it anymore. It's kind of, they've heard it, been there, done that. They find that when they use messages of supporting farmers and purchasing fresh, those sort of have is more impactful as far as customers are concerned. So those are the things that you want to basically, the messages that you want your customers to take home. But also, if you're doing other messages at the individual level or the farmers market level, you want to make sure that your communication speaks to some of the barriers that your customers are actually experiencing, right? So for example, if this, your customers generally say, well, I don't like farmers market because I want to go to the grocery store and I want to get everything all together, one-stop shopping. Or, I need to make time for social activities, so I don't have time to come to the farmers market and so on, or prices are too high, then the messaging has to be focused on what those barriers are that you're trying to overcome, right? So, in terms of one-stop shopping, you can say, the farmers market has it all, right? We have bakery products, we have specialty value-added things and your produce and so on, and artisan products and all of that, or that it's a fun trip. You can have events and festivals and so on and make sure they're aware of those. Although again, in that survey, it shows that customers are not willing to pay more or visit farmers market when they have some of these other social activities. But again, when you've seen one farmer's market, you've seen one farmer's market. So maybe it might work for your farmer's market. So again, make sure that the messaging is focused on overcoming those barriers. And so shameless plugs for two things. We do have an extension. We do have this local food finders map. So again, this is another way to help you reach out to the customers. A lot of time we focus on vendors, but we also need to make customers more aware and more educated about what our vendors are actually doing. So please look up our local food finders map and get your farm on here so you can get your message out to your customers.
Dee, we're running up on time.
Yeah, so one shameless plug for food safety training coming up. If you want to be trained on making sure that you're complying with food safety issues, we do have some training opportunities, May 13th or May 17th for general food safety training, as well as a May 24th for writing your food safety plan. So that's what I have, and we probably have a couple minutes for questions.
Can you go back to that slide and I'll pop that registration link in the chat? I was writing it down.
Thank you. All right, so you can either type your questions into the chat or I think unmute and ask us.
While we're waiting for people to think of their questions, I will give a little shameless plug that next week we're going to be talking about value-added products such as cottage industries and labeling requirements. And Natasha and Candace are teaching that session.
Okay. So any questions? Do we see any questions?
Yeah, there's one in the chat. The Kimmy is asking for you to go to the slide with the pricing websites.
I think I stopped sharing my screen. Where is my slide? Hold on. Oopsie daisy. Give me 1 second while I find my, I'll go back to that. Let's take any other questions that we may have. I have too many things open on my screen. And I want to make sure I'm not closing.
You're
any
still showing the PowerPoint.
I am still showing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Oh, okay, there we go. All right, do you see that?
There they are.
Yeah, okay, wonderful.
And again, guys, we will make the PowerPoint available. I need to check and see if the website is up right now. We will share the link when we get that up.
Well, I must have done a really good job because we have no questions. Or is it that I bored people to death in there? Thanks, Carrie.
If you have questions pertaining to next week, you can also email those to us and we can make sure we get your specific questions addressed. If you have something related to cottage industries or value-added products, if you would like to email those ahead of time, we can also make sure we address those.
Thank you,
I'll be excited for that price reporter to come out.
I know. So yeah,
it's exciting.
So we have, yeah, it's something that we're working on. We applied for a specialty crop block grant, but with or without it, we are hoping to be able to do this project. So because we think it's very important. And it's not just, saying, oh, the price in, Mercer County for strawberries was X or Y. We want to be able to go back, do some historical prices and also do some, analysis and some forecasting, like how will this price, what will this price look like at the start of the season, end of the season, mid-season, next year, those kinds of things. So really, it should be very informative. So.
Hey, Kimmy is asking about the link in the presentations coming up. The Zoom link that you received today, all of the actual Zoom presentations share the same link. So you'll be getting the same link from me every week is what you click on to open up the sessions when we have them live. As far as the PowerPoint presentations, we are creating a website. I think Karen's doing it through Moodle. And I apologize, I don't know. I'm not sure if Karen's on here. I don't really understand Moodle, so I don't understand it yet. But she is using Moodle to house the senior food voucher training class. In order for you to watch that later, we had to do that a little differently. But the site that she's setting up for that is where we're going to be pasting the PowerPoint presentations. And once all that is set up, we will give you access to that. And we do not have it set up yet, but we will have all the PowerPoints as well as some of the presenters are going to have handouts for you. So everybody that has registered will get access to that as well.
And Kimmy, if you were late signing up for the series and you want last week's presentation, I'll send you the link through Facebook.
Emily, what we will do is
I'll go up on Moodle too.
Yes. Well, what we will do is as soon as this presentation goes up, I will send both links. We'll do that every week. We'll send the link with all the previous presentations on it. So you'll get an email after this one is posted with the 2 links, and then next week it'll be 3 links because people are continually signing up, so they may have missed the previous weeks.
Jody, you're so organized.
I still don't understand Moodle.
For them, they're just going to get a link. They go in, they just sign up for a password, and then they can access the course that way. So it's just a link that participants are going to get. So
yeah, that platform just gives us the ability to put things like PowerPoints and other documents up in addition to recording. So it is helpful in that sense.
Right. And I apologize that you should be getting 2 emails a week from us. Some people have requested that we send an email that morning, and then other people have requested a reminder email. So that's why you got an email first thing this morning, and then you got an email like right before the presentation. So I apologize that I'm clogging your inbox. All right, does anyone have any other questions?
I don't see any.
Someone says they want to see slide 20 again.
20. This is 20, but I don't think it's 20.
Maybe
So is the one
21.
before or after?
And someone else made the comment they didn't get the previous link. There could be two reasons for that. One thing is some of the people that have signed up have not given me a correct email address. So some people are getting kicked out. If I do not have an email address, then I cannot contact you. The other thing is it depends on when you sign up. If you sign up after I send things out, you may not get whatever I'm sending out because we're not repeatedly signing up and I don't have a way to sort people. It doesn't tell me when you signed up.
Catherine, was that the slide you wanted?
I'm sorry, I had it muted. No, it was the one I didn't get to finish writing down the link. It was the bit.ly/2p3.
It's right there in the chat, Catherine.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah, it looks different, but if you click that, it'll take you right to the food safety training
Thank you.
registration.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if it was the food safety or which one that was. So
It'll
that's
take you to all of them. You can register for both trainings.
awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I missed last week. So I've been on the phone all morning with the USDA and
Welcome
And
to our
Kimmy, they
training. We
are
will take care
virtual
of you.
trainings.
yeah.
If you want to send me that link, when I send the email out after a while, when the presentation is up, I can include that in that.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And last week we plugged Dave McGill is getting ready to have a series of shiitake mushroom workshops. So I'll plug him one more time. If that's something you're interested in, that will be coming from WVU Extension. I think most of those are in May. Last call for questions. Anybody else have anything?
So Kimmy was asking, so Kimmy, both of those, all of those three are in are virtual classes. And we've had one under our belt and it went really well virtually. So we think that, yeah, it works really well virtually. And we'll mail for these. We will be mailing all of the materials to you ahead of time. That's why we do have a registration deadline before the classes so that we have sufficient time to mail you your materials you need for the sessions.
All right. Sign off and you'll be getting the links when we get them up. So everybody have a great day. Thank you for joining us and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.